Well, first of all, my name is Evgenia Giakoumopoulou. I'm French and Greek, and I've been in amazing, lovely Montenegro for just over a year now. And so I'm heading the Council of Europe office here. And the Council of Europe is a human rights international organization of which Montenegro is a member state. And I'm saying that because it's very important to not confuse it with the EU. And everybody, law students, political science, journalists, everyone mixes the two, so it's not really, do not get offended for me specifying that. And the EU is the organization with 27 member states, of which Montenegro is on the accession path, so it's now doing all kinds of reforms to, in a process to become a member state, but it's already a member state since 2007 of the Council of Europe, which means that it has ratified the European Convention of Human Rights, and it has a whole set of obligations. It actually has ratified also 95 other conventions, which people don't know that the Council of Europe doesn't deal just with this major treaty, which is called the European Convention of Human Rights, which is attached to the European Court of Human Rights, which is maybe what you tend to hear more when it comes to the Council of Europe. But in fact, there is all kinds of treaties and topics on which the member states together agree that they're bound by certain standards, and then they ratify. So Montenegro has agreed on 95 of those topics, including the Istanbul Convention, which is the Convention on Violence Against Women, the Anti-Trafficking Convention, and a whole areas, a number of topics on which Montenegro is now a party, as it is a member state of the Council of Europe. So if that is clear, also, I mean, it's interesting to know that it's the youngest member state since 2007. That makes it the youngest, the 47th. But comparatively, because as I mentioned, it has ratified 95, whereas we have about 200 something plus conventions, it's actually doing really well. Now, if you've been following a bit the news this week, because it was International Human Rights Day, there's been a lot of discussions from the Ombudsperson, from the Council of Europe, the EU, the UN, the OSCE, everyone's out there, the NGOs, talking about the situation in terms of human rights. So Montenegro is doing, in some regards, really well, and in others, well, not so much. And mostly, the easiest way to present it is to say that, well, again, on paper, Montenegro has prepared a lot of laws. It's doing a lot to have the framework, to have the laws, the policies, the institutions that would be ready to implement those standards correctly. But compared to what it has in place, we don't see what we would expect to see in terms of implementation. So what the citizens, the ultimate, people protected by all the standards actually benefit from on a daily basis is not the protections and the guarantees that should be there based on the existing laws, and it's not yet fully aligned with all of our standards. That's for the broader picture, but are we clear with this difference between EU and Council of Europe? And so the core values of the Council of Europe are human rights, democracy, and rule of law. So again, very different from the EU. We don't have this integration process. We don't have economical, per se, questions, but we work on areas that are related, of course, for example, in the office here. And I will explain exactly how our office fits in all of this broader picture. Just checking, because I did prepare notes nonetheless, even if I didn't prepare slides, because I tend to speak fast, so stop me. Our office here works like in let's say 4 general thematic areas, which we have defined together with the European Union, because our support is precisely to facilitate this accession process to the EU, but based on our own standards. Because at the end of the day, what the EU does is look at whether Montenegro is doing well in terms of respecting its obligations. Our standards are a criteria, let's put it that way. So the thematic areas with which we're supporting now the country is in anti-corruption and anti-money laundering. So action, what we call action against economic crime, freedom of media and protection of journalists, the work on justice reform, which with all of its components, which is reforming the institutions and supporting the restructuring, but also better implementation of the human rights for citizens and victims' rights, rights of the accused, stuff like that. And last but not least, anti-discrimination. And on that, well, again, on each of those thematic areas, we have different types of actions, but there we work with the LGBT community, with the Roma community, with the education sector to make it more inclusive. So if you, I mean, we can get into more details, but that's the areas with which we are busy right now, and which also correspond more or less with what the EU progress report, so-called progress report, has also identified as areas with progress is limited and where we want to see more done. So, to go back to what the Council of Europe's work, the idea behind its functioning and where our office and the work that we do in Montenegro fits. If I had brought the slides, the corporate slides, you would see a triangle, which they like to call, because this is broadcasted. I'm making fun of my colleagues now. So.
It is going to be.
Okay. Well, this triangle, the dynamic triangle, or something like that, which is actually very helpful to visualize the way the action of the Council of Europe is structured, is that it's so three components that sort of influence each other constantly in a circle. So if you picture your triangle, you would have first what we call standard setting. In simple words, it's the creating the principles by which we all abide. So the first and most important one for the Council of Europe is the European Convention of Human Rights. So that would be standard setting exercise. That means that an intergovernmental body, so representatives of all those member states, come together and agree on a text that is then put forward for ratification, or depending on the type of text, if it's a treaty, it goes for ratification. If it's just what is called like soft law, which is more guidance, then it's agreed upon with a consensus from all the member states, and it's just available there to be guidance for the implementation of the standards. So first you have this component where all 47 member states agree on the principles. Then you have what we call monitoring, which is basically checking if it's done correctly. And for that, well, you have all kinds of mechanisms. So the most obvious one is the European Court of Human Rights. It's not even a mechanism, it's a full-fledged court. It's judicial. But then you have sort of quasi-judicial bodies, like the European Committee for Social Rights, which is a quasi-court. So you can bring cases to it, but not individual cases. It works a bit differently. But you also have mechanisms like groups of experts that come and do visits in the countries with thematics. For example, I mentioned before the Istanbul Convention, so the Convention against Women and Domestic Violence. It has its own, sorry, yes?
I was member of Grevio.
Oh, I was coming to this. Well, you can tell us all about your experience, because this is very, very important. So, the monitoring mechanisms, some of the most important treaties are equipped with this group of experts that comes and does an evaluation. It means that it interacts with the authorities, with the civil society, with the people. It does some desk research. It will look on paper if it's, how the laws are, etc. But then it comes and does visits. And because Montenegro is a member state of the Istanbul Convention, it received the visit of the Grevio, which is the group of experts on violence against women, which then issued a report with a set of recommendations. So, and it's cyclical, which means that now they're going to come back every 4 or 5 years. And Montenegro is supposed to have made progress on the basis of the previous recommendations. Where it's interesting is that these sets of recommendations also serve, again, as a basis, for other organizations. And again, the EU will look at those, whether it's Grevios or what we call GRECO, the Group of Expert Anti-Corruption, whether it's ECRI.
I was incumbent member of GRECO.
You should do the presentation. GRECO, really important one, which just did its evaluation visit in September. So we're going to wait for a new report. And in this report, it's going to tell us if there's been progress made on the areas where there were recommendations before, or and what new areas there are to work on. And well, each mechanism works a bit differently. Some look at the entire convention, some look at specific areas, etc. At the moment, because the Grevio and the Istanbul Convention is a new treaty and they're going for the first time in every country, they're doing what is called a baseline report. So they look at the entire convention situation, like a first assessment, and then they will potentially look more specifically. So this is the monitoring, which is again the verification, the checking of the implementation. And then this is where we come in. On the basis of those recommendations, we support the countries, because we don't just dump it on them and like figure it out, deal with it. No, we propose, and it's financed by the Council of Europe or also by other stakeholders. In our case, everything we do here is co-financed by the EU. We design cooperation and technical assistance projects, which means that we work together with the authorities, together with the civil society, together with all the stakeholders that are relevant to prepare concrete programs to help those reforms. And usually it has, pretty much all of them have three layers, which is, first we look at the laws on paper. Are they okay? What do we need to change? There's always space to improve. I said before, Montenegro is doing well. It's doing well. We're still in the middle of, I don't know how many legislative reforms, because there is space for improvement. We were talking about, I mentioned ECRI, Grevio, which are dealing respectively with domestic violence, violence against women, and racism and intolerance. On all these questions, laws are not bad at all, but we see problems in the implementation before the court. There is always too many hate crimes, or cases of domestic violence end up in misdemeanor court. There is problems of qualification. There is not enough, the sanctions are too low. The investigations are not conducted always as they should. So we start with the legal side, and we look at the criminal code, criminal procedure code, for example, and we make suggestions to support these changes in the law. The second component of what we try to do is to train people, because you can have the best laws if they don't know how to use them. So then we support judges, police, teachers, universities also are involved in the process, journalists, everyone who is relevant in a given area. We are working together with usually, it can be directly with them, but even better, we work with their training institutes. So the Judicial Training Center, the Police Academy, these types of places, to create curricula where we integrate the human rights inside of it. And the third component is awareness raising. That's campaigns. That's how we raise awareness, how we inform the general public of what the rights that are, what maybe certain issues are, and that they are also responsible for keeping an eye, or for some of them, or reversely, to just inform them that they have access to certain rights that they may not be aware of. So, for example, at the moment, because so it was Human Rights Week, as I mentioned. We launched a big campaign on hate speech, anti-hate speech, obviously. Never know. I tend to always cut short. I remove all the antis, and I am always talking about like how our project on corruption, our project, and I feel like people hear me, so I think we're going to think that we're just. No, so anti-corruption, anti-discrimination, anti-money laundering, and so anti-hate speech. And there, the idea, of course, is to touch on different topics that maybe people are not so sensitized to. So we identified 7 groups or grounds on which we see that hate speech has risen in the country recently, and it was important to, create those discussions to provoke reflection around such things as, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-gypsyism, ableism. Ableism is for the persons with disabilities. And then issues that are, emerging from tensions on religious grounds or ethnic grounds. And I think I forgot racism and xenophobia. So on all of these, there's different visuals, different messages. We have local celebrities. That's what I was told. No, but they're great, our celebrities, sorry. That are, have joined. No, they're actually wonderful. And they're really giving their time and their name and their face to push those messages. And they're famous athletes, they're actors, they're, we have an opera singer who's really wonderful. And so all of this is in an effort to talk about what we do in a different way, to speak to different people, and to, you know, turn our language into something that is more tangible and conveys better what we're trying to say. Behind the hate speech, of course, is the idea that none of this is just words. There are multiple consequences to that. It propagates hatred, which has serious, concrete, up to physical, consequences on certain groups. But it simply, even if it doesn't go as far as physical violence, it can be rejection and discrimination from employment, from rejection from the families, or these kinds of situations which have necessarily heavy mental, economic consequences on the people that are targeted. So this is one campaign which we can discuss more if you want, and the other one which this time is more about focused on the victims potentially, which was on free legal aid, and it's to raise awareness on the fact that all victims of domestic violence, regardless of what their financial situation is, and same applies to victims of trafficking, are entitled to have legal support for free. So the moment they go to court and they report their case, they are allowed to have a lawyer that will support them for free. And so ispričaj priču do kraja. And so tell the whole story. And actually, what happened is that we launched the campaign literally a day or two before there was a very tragic case reported. There's been even more since. So the question came, but tell the whole story to whom? What is the slogan about? So it actually forced us to think about it even more, because it originally was just like a pep talk, like powerful sort of invitation to, seize your right, seize that opportunity. But then the question was, okay, well, but really, what do you do in that situation? Because there was a question of maybe one of the persons that, one of the victims, which actually ended up dead, had actually reported the case. So, well, then we thought actually tell the whole story. Of course, it's an encouragement to use the institutions in place, but more than anything, it's also to raise, if you speak up, and if we have the real figures, which, by the way, the ombudsman, the other said, or maybe it was Civic Alliance, someone mentioned at the panel on last Friday that we suspect that only 1/5 of the cases are actually reported of domestic violence. But if we had a full knowledge of what's happening, we could add violence which is systemic. Systemic meaning that it's a societal issue. It shouldn't be possible that someone gets annoyed and reacts like that and feels the impunity. If we don't respond like that, I mean, or you're a criminal. Somehow this in the society is accepted as a private matter, as a family matter, so it stays there. And worse than that, there is even a tendency in a lot of the professionals, and this was one of the findings of Grevio, there's even a tendency of a lot of the professionals that deal with cases of domestic violence to try and find resolutions within the family, to protect the family unit. They think it's better for the kids if the parents stay together. This is completely against everything we know and what we advocate for. We know that children in families where there is domestic violence, even if they're not themselves the targets of the violence, they are ricochet victims. They're going to be victims because they're witnesses of this, and the consequences on them are equally traumatic. So it's very, very complex problems that need to be discussed, deconstructed, and it's not about pointing fingers. It's certainly not about victim blaming, but tell the whole story is let's, come clean about what this situation is. Someone also the other day was comparing it to a pandemic. It is of its own pandemic, unfortunately. So we have a lot of discussions to have around this and to shake the attitudes and the understandings around these questions. So those are examples of the work that we do when it comes to engaging with the general public. Questions before I look at what I have next to say? Anyways, and that's the whole triangle. So it's, we create the standards, we check for their implementation and come up with recommendations, and then people like my colleagues, whether they're based in Strasbourg or one of the field offices, like in Montenegro, there's one office in every one of the Western Balkan countries, but also in Turkey, but also in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. So where we are especially present and especially supporting with a number of actions at the same time. We have these little offices which allow us to be present in the ground, and my colleagues are a mix of internationals and locals, and we are there on a daily basis working on each one of those topics and bringing it closer, you know. So the dynamic triangle that you're not seeing behind me. Are there any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Are there like more women that are actually reporting abuse or anything similar to that topic? Because before I heard, obviously I'm not like sure if that's true, but it was way less because they were like kind of ashamed of admitting the problems in family to the public, so they would like keep it for themselves. So it's just better for the husband to stay. I'm gonna like take this in, and that's gonna be fine. But are there like more cases, which is not obviously good, but they're like still seeking for help?
It's not entirely so. Well, I will tell you what we know, and you will decide. I don't think that we have enough. That's another issue: data collection, like collecting the figures, the numbers based on reports, and even when they report, is it recorded correctly? Same apply. You know, this is also an issue, especially when it comes to hate crime. Are we recording this violence for on the basis of what it was happening, or at least how the victim perceived it, to have those statistics? Not sufficiently well enough at the moment, so we don't have this type of very clear picture. But what some figures that we have. So I mentioned that we on some that I don't know what the source is, but the colleague from the Civics Alliance mentioning 1/5 of cases being reported means that it's definitely not enough. However, at the same time, we know that we have 2,500 cases of domestic violence pending annually before the court. So I don't know if that's 1/5 of all the cases or what it is, that I'm not sure, but it still means that there's quite a number of people that are bringing those cases to the court. The question is, what is the real figure? Is this just the tip of the iceberg, or are we doing better? There is definitely some, I would say that there is some progress also, because we saw what happened during COVID. And during COVID, unfortunately, all the problems that people had and all the patterns of discrimination and violence and everything exploded in a way, because of less possibilities to go seek help, because of people being isolated with potentially the people that were hurting them, and that we saw a lot also with the case of domestic violence, where because of increased economic situations and stresses within the household, because people were simply spending more time together and more frustrations were there, there was an increase that was quite measurable. And in Montenegro, for example, I think it's very revealing, because you see immediately the impact of the lockdowns. SOS, the hotline, between March and April 2020, which is basically when all the lockdowns started, recorded an increase of 20% of calls, I mean, of reports of violence. So there is more reporting. Is it because there's more women reporting? Is it because there's many more cases and therefore more people are reporting? This is always a bit unclear. But this is also why we're trying to do all of this, us and other organizations, and then the NGOs do it themselves a lot, obviously. All these efforts to inform people that they have the rights, that they have these support systems, that they can talk to specialists, that they can ask for help, be it legal or psychological, or that they have ways to get themselves out of a situation, and there is a system in place to protect them. But this is not specific to, honestly, it's not specific to Montenegro, the issue of underreporting, and then how even when they do, there's always a, you see always, based on the reports, you always see like a chart that goes down when it comes to how many cases actually end up being properly investigated, then prosecuted, then when they go to court and when there is an indictment and a sanction, like a penalty, and then what the victim gets, then forget about it. Compensation is yet again a whole other level. Here we're just talking, is there justice delivered when it comes to the perpetrator? But it's still a process which is still, and unfortunately it's discouraging, because then victims think, what's the point? They're going to get themselves through so much stress, etc. So I don't think I answered your question, but I
explained.
Okay. It's because I couldn't really answer it, so But are there any other questions?
I would like to know more about campaigns, but I guess that you will not get into it more details. In the sense that I guess this second campaign was just launched, right? Like
yes.
A week ago? Or
exactly. Thursday.
Thursday, and the first one is as well 2021 campaign, right?
Yes, it's from October.
Both, okay, the second one I'm aware, but the first one is going to be active in the next years as well, because there's
yes.
a short campaign. It's not something we can...
No, it's not actually. So it's called, so to say a bit more about that one, that was on the anti-hate speech. It's called Block the Hatred, Share the Love. It's a regional campaign. Originally, so we have already started rolling it out in 2021. I think end of 2020 it started at like a regional level, so it's mostly on social media, of course, because we couldn't have that many events. And yes, the messages and the ambassadors are from across the region, so Western Balkans. And now we're making the country-specific ones. So the one that we launched last week is the Montenegro specific one. So we work with local actors, with local personalities, and it's adapted. So some of the visuals, some of the messages, and we're going to have a lot of events here. So now it becomes much more in person. So, okay, of course there are restrictions due to COVID measures and the fact that we can't get a lot of people in the same room, but it's now going to be much more engaging. It starts online, but and I'm going to invite you all to follow it. I will give you the names. Let's check. And otherwise they're going to be very mad at me if I forget that. So circulating the messages, of course, online. It's a very, very strong tool. Everyone is there, especially the youth, and we're looking at young people for this. It is a campaign that concerns everybody, but for us, it's critical that this is something that is, embodied and carried by, the future of Montenegro. And actually, there are. So I was mentioning the celebrity. The famous, let's say, ambassadors, but we also have the young European ambassadors who are actually students or very young professionals that have participated in programs together with us in the European Union and who are also very, very much engaged. So, pushing that through their circles, through the universities and through youth organizations. So, I think at this point, this one is going to go for sure for the whole of 2022, and I think there's a lot of flexibility of what we can imagine. I was hearing, so our ambassadors are, and I'm sorry for mispronouncing the names, but one of them is Marija Vukovic, who is the high jump Olympic champion, and she, I don't know, maybe it won't happen, but like we were thinking, why not have like workshops about, doing some training about high jump. Something that would just be engaging and fun. Another ambassador is Dubravka Drakic, who's a very famous actress. So of course there's a million things we could do with someone like her, and they're very, very enthusiastic, and they gave already a lot of their time, and they were there on Thursday and gave really, really great speeches. And the other person who was not in the room, which is why I am being so bad right now at not remembering, then her name is a very famous tennis player, which I will tell.
Here in Montenegro.
Yes, a female tennis player, but I will tell you. Yes, exactly, and thank you. So these three, and also Tamara Radulic, I think is the last name, from who's a very young but super talented opera singer, already singing everywhere, but based in London, and who made an incredible performance to start off our campaign. And so these people are already mobilized and will mobilize more with the general public going forward through different activities that we will be designing. So you should be seeing different things, but it also involves, you know, certain types of trainings. I mean, it's a bit more. We want this to be very alive and not stay just with like some posts, but it will circulate on multiple levels. We think that it's really, really an important topic. It's also very sensitive at the moment. But it was very important for us also to see the engagement of the government. That, I mean, for the launching we had the Prime Minister present and Minister Strazentic, and the Ombudsperson, of course, because he's the best supporter imaginable in the country for human rights. But it's very, very, very significant to see that this is taken on seriously and that there is an attachment and a commitment to deal with it, because I mean, it's an issue in general. It's also related to fake news, but in the region there is a history that, you know, makes you think twice about not letting things like that slide. We don't want to see, and which we are observing, you know, triggering tensions that are unfortunate and dividing and polarizing the society at the moment in a way that it hadn't in the last years. So it's really alarming to see these types of trends. It was also noticed by the European Union and mentioned in its report, so it's not taken lightly. For us, I mean, the campaign was thought of even before. It was thought before the new government was in place, but it has taken a whole new meaning, and we really wanted to make sure that, you know, we take the time to deconstruct all of these things. What is sexism? What is ableism? What is homophobia, transphobia? Why is our society, when threatened, when COVID happens, why is there more anti-Gypsyism, and why are people scapegoating the Roma and Egyptian community? So we need to understand these things and understand why it's so harmful in practice, in concrete. What are the real consequences, and why we should all, you know, not just abstain, call out when we see things like that. You know, every single tiny action that you make to stop spreading these types of rhetorics is actually huge, because it adds up. The problem of hate speech is that it's a lot of seemingly minor things, because also when they're online, they're anonymous and people don't think that it has such an importance, but when they accumulate, it's extremely violent and extremely harmful and violent and toxic for all of for the whole of society. And you see the repercussions in people's reactions to religious events, to situations like that, which are really regrettable. So this is an area in which we've decided to really put a lot of effort, hand in hand with members of society, with the government, and we hope with you, since you're going to share all of our posts as of tonight.
You are engaging universities?
In the work?
You are planning, yes.
With the campaign, you mean specifically, or in general? I mean,
as a form of.
I'm sure that we will, because it makes a lot of sense. In general, we work with universities. We have a legal clinic, for example, which was a very, very cool exercise with the law students, where they actually were working on real cases of domestic violence and prepare and supporting, but together, you know, with the ombudsperson and with real mentors, and so they weren't just let there like that. But they have been participating in these also moot courts, so fake trials, to really get a practical experience of what it means of incorporating this human rights approach and all everything they've learned in in their future practice. So several of them received certificates, and it was really, they did an excellent job, and they were very motivated, so that was very motivating for us to continue. We work with universities as well also on our education project, because quite interestingly, I think, very often when we speak about education and inclusion, we talk about more primary, secondary education, but we're also working with the universities on academic integrity. And academic integrity is, well, we call it that, but in fact, it's, to me, very attached to anti-corruption and a culture, changing a culture of, you know, it's not just putting sanctions or you know, not just take measures in place to avoid it, is changing the culture that students should not want to find a way around for their own integrity. The idea would be to, you know, to earn, that the reward you get at the end is earned, and because you wanted to achieve that for yourself and not just cheat or fraud or whatever. So there is a lot of work done there, and we have prepared some curricula that have already been followed, and there is some kind of human rights test that you take at the end, and on academic integrity, and several thousands of students have already taken it. I think it was piloted first with the University of Montenegro, but the idea is that it will go to private universities, etc. So the more, you know, we would want the whole of the student course in Montenegro to follow and to take this training. I don't think it's very cumbersome, but to understand what academic integrity is, and to make sure that they themselves, again, commit for themselves, but also to change the culture around them. Then when they become professionals, you know, it's a whole mindset. Something that I thought was very interesting, I found out when discussing with a dean of one of the universities, was that at this moment, they did a survey, and people were obviously very honest. I was surprised by the results. I think I would have lied if I had been me. But they were asked, what's more motivating for you to get something done? You know, is it the fear of punishment, or is it a reward? You know, like a gratification for having done something well. And it was the fear. It was predominantly the fear of punishment that was the driving force behind doing something. And I was so we need to change that.
There are a lot of fears.
Yeah, we need to get people to want to do things because they believe in it and care about it, and not because they fear negative consequences, but rather because they are drawn to the positive ones. But this is a collective responsibility. It's a responsibility for obviously the education sector and everyone in the teachers and professors, but also the entire. I think also the way parents are supported in promoting this, the way we talk about these questions in the media, the way we, you know, report, whatever, everything needs to. It's a cultural change that needs to be made here. And I'm not saying this is specific to Montenegro. It's just Montenegro is also in this mindset, and I think that it's actually really great that we're doing this here, because it's quite and. To make sure that I'm not getting, you know, I don't want to point a finger at Montenegro. On the contrary, we did these surveys and we're doing this work, so we know this. We have these interesting facts, but in fact, this project is quite innovative. The academic integrity is like we're doing very advanced work here, and there is the law on academic integrity, and we've set up. We supported the setting up of an ethic charter for this ethics committee, so with a whole set of principles to challenge fraud and plagiarism and stuff like that.
Is it directed only towards students?
No, it's also professors, I think.
Professor, but academic community.
Yes, yes. So this is part of our education project, and it has this like whole portfolio. Some of it is more traditional, like inclusive education work, which is, you know, making sure that the school is safe for different groups, and working with children to make sure that they understand democratic values and diversity as a positive concept, and become more responsible citizens. But the other, the second fold of that project is really on this academic component, and there the work is quite advanced and new. I mean, I think it's really putting Montenegro on the map as a best practice in this regard. So now that we have the tools in place, the more you know, students and universities start using them, the better, the more we start changing the culture. But honestly, I mean, I think this needs to start really, really young with. I mean, if you reach university and you already have this type of approach, it's not too late, but
It's harder to change.
yeah. So it's a whole it's a long process, but that's the same with everything that involves changing mentalities. It's the hardest part. Changing laws is not easy, but we know how. Changing mentalities and attitudes. Making people more accepting of each other, you know, breaking the fear or the rejection of otherness, as we call it. These things are very difficult and slow processes, and this is where really it's about engaging as broadly as possible, generating difficult conversations, but slowly but surely, I think we see change, and we see it also because. You see civil society growing. I mean, at the moment we're working a lot with the LGBT community, and the LGBT community in Montenegro is very solid. The NGOs are brilliant. We use a lot of their members as our experts for our trainings because they're really, really excellent. And you see that this is, you know, like, I mean, 10 years ago it was much more complicated to even discuss these topics. So you do see progress. Now we have a law on registered same-sex partnerships in Montenegro. And the Pride was really cool, if any one of you went in October, or when was it? Yes, October, I think, October. Compared to the ones that were being discussed, you know, with security issues and stuff like that, this one was much more. I mean, for Podgorica standards, it was widely attended, and it was everything went smoothly, it was safe, and it was colorful, and a lot of young people that you know, people who are not necessarily super famous to the activist community who just joined in. So you do see progress, you see changes, so it's worth it. Slowly but surely. Are there any other questions?
Maybe just to add that the involvement of NGO sector in any area you mentioned is extremely important. Not just in the area of LGBT, also for combating violence against women and violence. We have maybe dozens of very experienced NGOs.
Absolutely. The same applies to them, of course. I mean,
experts for
and
the issue.
Yeah, I mean, the same applies exactly. A lot of the persons leading the women's rights organizations in Montenegro are experts. We work with them very, very closely. Well, the role of civil society is fundamental. I mean,
Plus media.
Sorry?
Plus media.
Yes, media, but media is a different, complicated area, so we can talk about them, but separately. But when it comes to civil society, something that for me is important also to stress in terms of how I think we should visualize our work, us meaning the international organizations, or at least mine, the Council of Europe. We are facilitators, right? We're not here, we're not dictating. Montenegro has its own obligations. It has its obligations towards its own citizens, towards the international community in a way. So we're facilitating it in doing what it's supposed to do. But at the end of the day, the real individuals who really have all the power and their voice, whose voice matters more than anything, is the civil society. And they are, basically for us, the important part is that we can put everyone at the same table. Sometimes it's not needed, but sometimes it's needed. And to bring everyone around, you know, when there is a tension, when certain NGOs are asking for something and it's not being heard, or it's not being heard enough, or that the negotiation is not possible, there we're acting really as a facilitator, because we can bring everyone at the same table and it creates sustainability. The idea is that if we start within the context and the framework of our projects to work hand in hand with a certain agency of the government and a certain NGO, and we build something together, then when we are done with our project, they have trust, they have relationship built. When certain NGO member has been training the police within our programs for years, when we're gone, that trust remains, you know, it continues. And the idea is to really support, because who knows better? The citizens and the experts who are within those NGOs. They're the ones who know what's happening in reality, in everyday life. They're the ones who are close to the people, close to the communities they represent. So what matters is that they can do their part, which is to create a sort of bottom-up pressure. And what we do as international community, international organizations, is to do, if we want to look at it from a, you know, peer pressure point of view, we do the top-down approach. So we come from the international level saying, like, look, this is what we've all agreed, you're not doing enough on this front, you should be doing more. And then from the grassroots up, you have the civil society, and we meet each other halfway to find the solutions. We're coming with the principles and the recommendations in general terms, but the solutions and the facts, the figures, you know, the numbers that you were asking before. Do we have the numbers? No, we don't, and unfortunately it's because, well, in an ideal world it would be done by institutions and authorities, but it's not always possible for a number of reasons. It's a lot of resources and it's complicated to put in place. But then NGOs have a lot of that data, because they're actually working with victims, they're working with, they do their own surveys, etc., etc. So bringing this together is how I think we achieve actually in the end, you know, we move this slightly more heavy needle to obtain impact, real, sustainable, long-term impact that really makes a difference. So it's a real strong cooperation with everybody, and the willingness and the real political will of the governments to listen and to work together is obviously fundamental. And I think, I mean, we're lucky to have this. There is challenges, but there's a lot of political will to get things done, which is the starting point. So it's set up. So you have a team. You have government, you have NGO. Yes. They are all willing to support. Yeah. Yes. I mean, for example, on these topics that we've been discussing, you know, to take a step back also and talk a bit about how it can be more challenging in other places. Of course, here we're seeing, you know, some things are not moving fast enough. We would want more of this, more of that. It could be better. Yes, that's true, and we're on it. But for example, for me, it's important to see that Montenegro hasn't yet slided into what is called the anti-gender backlash. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's this phenomenon that is led by very conservative, ultra-nationalist, ultra-religious movements all over the world, but in Europe they're very, very present in they started in Eastern Europe, but they're being efficient everywhere, to be honest. But where you see it the most is where they attacked the Istanbul Convention, because, I mean, it's a treaty that protects women from violence. I mean, you know, what could you possibly, if you're a very, you know, religious, family-oriented person, you should agree with the concepts behind the Istanbul Convention. But the problem was that the Istanbul Convention defines gender, and it defines gender as a social construct, which for a number of very conservative ultra-right groups, was problematic because they think that this opens the door to challenging what they prefer, which is, a certain vision with gender roles, with, gender and sex being exactly the same thing and being assigned at birth, and that's it, and this is, and you're born a certain way, and then you are stuck to certain societal expectations, jobs, family obligations. So men, women, binary, all about just creating a nuclear family and making sure patriarchy is safe. So that has now taken huge proportions. In certain countries, is it in Bulgaria, that they did not ratify this rhetoric of how dangerous the Istanbul Convention is, because this is a problem. It's gone really far. They made such a hateful narrative around it, such disinformation, such, really fake news around it, saying that it had a hidden agenda to promote more rights for trans persons or same-sex marriage. Not that this would be a problem, obviously. I mean, there are other Council of Europe standards that support this, so it's not the Istanbul Convention, but it's just that they mixed up everything and created this narrative that gender equality, that combating gender-based violence is actually, this has a hidden purpose of, Western liberal countries wanting to impose their ideologies on traditional, religious abiding countries and communities. And so based on that, they've managed to actually get people angry to the point that there were massive demonstrations in a lot of countries. And in Bulgaria, it went as far as having the Constitutional Court decide that they wouldn't ratify the convention because it is unconstitutional. I mean, this is sad. So you see the impacts of that, and it's quite, you see it everywhere. They're very popular as well in France. I mean, they have around the same-sex marriage discussions. They were very effective, these movements. They're actually very well funded. They have money from Russia, from the US, from Mexico. It's documented. There's a lot out there available at this point, we know. They're very well organized, and what's fascinating is that they're also now able to use our own tools, our human rights tools, against ourselves. So you see them integrating more and more places like the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, ECOSOC in the UN, places where discussions happen, and they come with, let's say, let's have a resolution on the rights of children, something children's rights. Why would you be suspicious? Of course, let's have more work and rights. And then you go...
Alienation issue also.
Sorry?
Parental alienation issue.
Exactly, these types of things. And then you start looking into the text and you realize that it's actually a very, very homophobic, transphobic text, a very misogynist text, and that actually through, they do this reverse victimization. They will take, it's like the pro-life movements. So they've ticketed, labeled something that is actually, limiting women's rights, but they've put it a nice label that makes it sound that it's pro-life, so pro-rights, pro the right to life or something. And now they've become quite good at that, so we're very, very cautious about what's happening because they're very well organized. So there is this whole broader context of the anti-gender movement or the gender backlash, the gender equality backlash. And so far, we're not seeing this in Montenegro. So I think this is really, really positive because it is coming closer also in some countries in the region. It is very predominant in countries of the former Soviet Union. So, and also now it's coming closer and closer, and it's in Hungary, in Poland, very, very, very vividly. So I think the fact that we still have so much to improve, but that there is this understanding and attachment to challenging all of this. I haven't heard anyone not agreeing to the fact that we absolutely need to do better on violence and against women and domestic violence. Well, LGBTI questions are a bit more sensitive. Some surveys that we collected with SRIJEDOM, an NGO, the results from a year ago, were not very comforting, because on the one hand, I was mentioning the civil society being very visible and doing really well and achieving a lot, but at the same time there is a disconnect between people thinking like, okay, whatever, not my children, not my colleague, not my friend, not my neighbor. So there is really a huge issue still within the mentalities and the attitudes. It's not actually embraced as something positive or neutral even. It's a problem in a lot of people's minds. So we have to work on all of these things, but at least we're not seeing in Montenegro yet anything that would indicate the taking root of these very, very negative rhetorics of the anti-gender movement. So that's to be positive. Any other questions? I'm looking at my notes. I mean, I didn't do it in the order I planned, but I've touched pretty much. The rest are like, I can give you names of standards, but I will spare you with all of their like acronyms, and I can just mention the Committee of Ministers recommendation 2010-5, so I've said it, which is the key standard on anti-discrimination on sexual orientation, gender identity grounds, since I mentioned that I was going to talk about the Council of Standards on women's rights and LGBTI rights. But then I mentioned the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We have a whole set there of panoply of resolutions. Again, those are guidance more than enforceable treaties, but that are basically some of the first documents and instruments in the world to put in writing and enshrine the rights of trans people to self-determination, protecting intersex persons from surgeries and interventions that are not medically required. These types of things, which are like very crucial, fundamental questions, but yet they were not anywhere until we had those resolutions in our hands in 2015 and 2017. So on that, we're proud to open the way, and that those are they're used a lot precisely by the civil society. We're creating tools for the civil society to then go and claim their rights for the whole of society, obviously. I mentioned them, so I'm covered. But I'm happy to discuss them more, just because they're like lengthy. If you have any questions on any of those particular issues, I just don't want to get boring.
What's your opinion on abortions?
My personal opinion?
Yes, your personal.
Well, it's the women's choice.
I'm glad to do that.
Yes, of course. Is it in the convention, the right to abortion?
Yes, there is 2 criminal offenses relating to the right of the women to decide about it.
No, I mean, forcing a woman, I mean, that goes against her right to her own determination on her body, and no, on this it's pretty clear, I think. It's quite unanimous.
We accepted it and put it in the last amendment of the criminal law in Montenegro.
There you go. Yes.
As well as genital
mutilation, yeah.
As a new criminal offense.
So yeah, because if we go back to talking about the Istanbul Convention, it's actually a very interesting instrument, and it's very broad, because it covers in terms of it sets substantive law, so which means that it creates an entire range of criminal or of offenses that should be criminalized in the domestic legislations, and then also has the procedural component, which is about how to process, how to conduct investigations, how everything around the procedures around these offenses should be carried out. But it's very broad, and like, for example, things like harassment, which were not seen as, before the Istanbul Convention, as necessarily, it wasn't obvious to everybody that being harassed at work or on the street should be, is a violence against women or gender-based violence, for that matter, depending on which. And it starts with that. It starts with stalking, I think, is like the first there, and goes all the way up, including genital mutilations, but all the way, you know, through rape and other, including marital rape, by the way. Very important to also discuss that. That was not obvious until recently in a lot of member states, that, you know, if you rape your wife, apparently it's not, for some people it wasn't rape because she's obliged to. But so these things are now clear, you know, through the Istanbul Convention, and it's a very important instrument, and it's really a pity that it's being challenged on such unfounded grounds. First, because it's not what it is accused of doing is not what it does. And even if it were, it's totally okay, because it is not the Istanbul Convention, but it is, in any case, trans persons' rights, same-sex persons' rights, women's rights, in all their ways, are protected by other instruments, in any case, and by the jurisprudence of the court, which is, you know, where most advancements are made usually before they're decided and enshrined into something else. It's first the court that will decide on a concrete case this is how the European Convention for Human Rights should be interpreted. So, because of course it was written in 1949, 50, adopted in 50, so they didn't anticipate everything. They didn't anticipate the reality in which we live. They also didn't anticipate the societal evolutions. But it's still very, very relevant, because the courts and the judges interpret it in the light of today's realities, and keeping in mind the spirit of the convention, what it was trying to achieve. You don't want the convention to be used to oppress people just because things are changing. So this is why, for example, the Article 14, the anti-discrimination article, keeps on evolving in the interpretation of the court, because it has this basically an etc. at the end, and other grounds, which allows for the court and the judges to increase more and more and more its applicability to new groups. And one other thing which I think is important to stress, because not everyone knows or thinks about it that way, is that when you have a case of the court against a country, it is that country, if it's found, if a violation is found, it's that country that has an obligation to remedy it, to take measures, individual for the person and general measures for the whole of country, to avoid the violation continuing. So those obligations are strictly on that country. But the interpretation of the court is for the convention and for all member states. So if, let's say, I don't know, a case against France finds something on women's rights, it will be France that has to prove that it has done something to remedy the situation, is also benefiting from that interpretation, and can claim that the law should be aligned with this interpretation of the convention, because it is the interpretation of the entire text and is applicable to all. It's only the enforcement that is for the defendant country. Other questions? Comments?
No, that's excellent, let's say, communication between decisions of European Court of Human Rights, because in the same time there's the promotion of the standards from Istanbul Convention. Mm-hmm. Because in many cases, decisions of European Court of Human Rights quoting the standards from Istanbul Convention.
Or the Grevio. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's another very important point, is that I mentioned soft law before, these guidances. Yes, it doesn't mean that they're less important, and one of the most evident way to understand how they're actually very enforceable directly is because they guide the court. So like Grevio, in its recommendations, or its general policy recommendation, now that it has a first.
For example.
Yeah.
One of the important standards, not just within the Istanbul Convention.
Yes, absolutely.
Other conventions as well.
Yes, for sure. So everything that comes from those expert groups, from the Committee of Ministers, which is our, let's say, executive body from the Venice Convention. Maybe you've heard of the Venice Commission, because it's a lot in the news sometimes, because when...
I was involved.
Relating to the elections mostly.
Yeah, and last year there was a lot about the prosecutorial council, and so, I mean, the Venice Commission comes into the picture.
Amendment of the constitution of Montenegro.
Exactly, yes. So it's a very important body.
As such, it was very involved in drafting.
Yeah. So it's a very important body that supports, because it's about constitutional law, and but it issues opinions. They're called opinions. That being said, the opinions that are used, aside from the fact that, of course, if it issues an opinion for a certain state, well, then there is the expectation to implement it as best as possible. But it's used, again, also by the court later to say, well, in a similar situation, this is what happened, or, the CPT standards, the Committee for the Prevention of Torture. Those are used regularly by the courts, ECRI, Grevio, all these mechanisms. Greta, yes, of course. Which was my previous position before coming here. I was working with Greta, the anti-trafficking body. So everything that these bodies, expert bodies, issue is at the end used then by the court to guide their own decisions, and then the decisions are enforceable. And they're the interpretation of the convention, the key treaty that all Council of Europe member states have ratified to become a member state. So. Soft law is a very unfair way. Yeah, it's an unfair way of qualifying these instruments, because they actually do matter, and they are used very much so in reality to by us when we're here trying to support reforms, by the court, by everybody who cares to do a good job. So yeah.
If I may just some recommendations within the Grevio activities. It's very easy to find just Council of Europe Grevio. You can find just very new general recommendation number 1
yes.
by Grevio relating to the digital violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's maybe 10-15 days ago issued, and you can find in very short form out of very good and
yes.
very, let's say, active recommendations.
Yes.
Also for COVID-19 issues,
yeah.
they have also several publications, very important and very new.
Yeah.
Because the Grevio following the new problems, and their reactions are very, very fast and efficient. Yeah, the website is actually full of information when it comes to the everything, and also collects from other organizations, and has a country-specific listed, resources. So you can find a lot there about violence against women, domestic violence in the context of COVID, and this new general policy recommendation, which is not for one country, it's for all of them, on the digital space. And that's a very difficult, very, very important topic, because we see how cyber harassment, cyber violence against women, again, whether they're politicians or anonymous, or bullying against girls at schools or anything, it's terrifying, the scale of the problem, and the impunity of it at the moment, the consequences. I mean, the suicides, from suicides of young girls to politicians withdrawing themselves from power, or simply journalists or anyone. Not, even you, the day you want to make a comment and you're like, God knows, what kind of, reaction I'm going to get. Even this censoring, preventive censoring that you're doing on yourself, but all the way to careers being ended, to breakdowns, to whatever, to physical harassment of people, because of this online violence against women. It's a really, it's a very, very scary, huge phenomenon. So it's a very first step that the Grevio has taken to issue this general policy recommendation that applies, well, of course, to all, to start tackling this. Yeah, we need a second session for this. I'll be back just for this online violence against women.
is very, 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 very problematic. Also because it incorporates so many nasty things, you know, from like.
As you said, it's so easy.
Yeah.
It feels to react very easy.
Yeah, these group raids or like this, you know, this kind of impulsive things that it has. But again, it's so deeply rooted in misogyny in such a way that is very complicated to deconstruct. But you see the immediate, I mean, I think the first ones to talk a lot about it were women in areas like gaming or stuff like that, where they were like really, really exposed to a lot of violence. And again, those are not just words, same as hate speech. I mean, this will come with you home, it will break you down, it might actually make you feel scared for, you know, if someone threatens you repeatedly to follow you or says that they know where you live or whatever. I mean, these are very serious aggressions, in fact. They're not just some words online that don't matter. And when your phone is constantly, you know, I've seen it because one of my closest friends is a visible lesbian politician in France, and you know, when it's like just hatred buzzing non-stop, it's mortifying.
I'm just curious, was it also mentioned in these campaigns about how some people in medical field abuse their power, as to say, I know in some countries it's allowed legally to do vaginal check without women's permission. Or sometimes,
is it?
In some countries it is. I right off my mind.
Yeah, well, probably. Yeah, probably. I mean, for sure somewhere, but like in Europe.
Yeah, and
maybe,
also after women give birth, sometimes.
Obstetrical violence. Yes, that's another big topic.
Yeah.
I mean, the campaigns that I just mentioned are not going in this direction, because the one that's about violence against is actually about domestic violence and is very much focused on this question of know your rights, you tell the whole story and use your rights, which is that of free legal aid. So it's a very, very narrow component of the whole issue that we're dealing with. But, you know, the point is that through that you initiate conversations, and you initiate conversations against gender-based violence, and then all of its declinations, and that we're not particularly as far as I know, we haven't addressed this specifically, but I would hope that the campaign encourages people to speak up about something like that. And maybe there's space for, you know, more, whether NGOs or us in the future, but like these discussions to be held. I know it's a big, I mean, actually, if you want to check, we're not doing this here in Montenegro, but now I just remember that the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, she issued an opinion or a human rights comment, or what it's called, I don't remember which one of the two, but she published her opinion on the obstetrical violence or such kinds of violence in the medical field against women. So there's, you could look it up. You can look it up and send you stuff. I will send you an email with all of the links to the campaigns and everything, and the human rights comment, and the links to Graveyard page, etc. The resources I've mentioned. But yeah, you can also feel free to, you know, I can leave you my email and you're free to write. I'm very happy to engage. I hope it was interesting. If you have any other questions, of course I'm here. But it's a pleasure to discuss what we do with you and the young people who will hopefully make all the difference in just a few years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.